Hey all, it's Deeg. What you're about to hear is a loose commentary about how I feel Guild Wars 2 has lost me as a player and what I would consider a core gamer. Somebody who wants to engage deeply with their game and be rewarded for it over the long term. I'm going to be comparing it with a couple of other games, Planetside 2 and Destiny 2. There'll be footage of all three of those and links in the description to jump around if you like. Thanks. Enjoy. So this morning I started my day the way I do a lot of my weekend mornings. One of my favorite all time things to do when I've got nowhere to be in a weekend morning and I'm on my own steam is to get up, make myself a cup of coffee, go sit on my couch in my living room, put on YouTube, and find something fun to watch, usually a gaming video of some kind. And one of my favorite creators to watch is a guy called Wooden Potatoes. If anyone watching this is fan of Guild Wars 2, no doubt you've heard of him. He's the biggest content creator within that community, at least on YouTube, and he does Twitch as well. He's been doing it for a long time, and I'm a big fan of his. And today, so I did this. I woke up, I grabbed my coffee, got comfy on the couch. My cat jumped up, and wanted to see what kind of food I ate. And as I settled in, I began listening to him talk about Living World Season 1 in Guild Wars 2, which, for all intents and purposes, no longer exists. It was the term Season 1 is used to describe a time in Guild Wars 2 after the game was released, but before its current content model took shape. And what it more or less amounted to is having content that came into the game and then left forever. Everything was designed to be there and gone again, with the idea, the conceit, implicitly, that this would motivate players to stay engaged with the game. And this is what a game like Guild Wars 2 is built on. The more players who stay engaged with it, the more players are likely to want to customize their look or tweak their gameplay or do something. Get involved, talk to other people who are playing it. And this, of course, encourages people to spend money on the in game store, which is really what supports the game. That's the business model for Guild Wars 2. It's hours spent in game multiplied by purchases in the trading post, the in-game store, the gem store. Anyway, so where am I going with this? Well, thinking about watching him talk about season 1 with what I can only characterize as bitterness really got me thinking about what Guild Wars is for, who Guild Wars is for, what the intended audience is, because it's pretty obvious from the way he talks about Guild Wars 2, the way that the game came to be as a kind of a reaction to Guild Wars, which was itself a big time reaction to World of Warcraft. And knowing where it is today, it really makes me ask the question, who is Guild Wars for? What kind of gamer, what kind of person, player is it for? Is it for core gamers who are looking for a deep game that they can tunnel into and pile in with their friends and come together to overcome challenges and get unique rewards out of it and be constantly incentivized to engage on a deeper level? Or is it for people who are interested in the social aspect, people who want to build communities and relationships, and those who really want to look cool and want to enjoy the fantasy of being in a fantasy world? Or is it for the people who want the lore, people who want a deep story, people who want to treat the episodic releases of Guild Wars like the episodic releases of a TV show or perhaps an anthologized movie. Think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How cool would it be for ArenaNet if everyone was excited about the newest expansion or Living World release of Guild Wars 2 as people are excited about the latest superhero movie to come out? I think ArenaNet would love that. I think any game company would. But that's not really the case we have. At least I certainly have fallen to a point where my interest in the releases really hits only a very shallow surface level. So, okay, I'm rambling. The point that I want to make with this video, or at least to examine and open up a discussion about, is a response to the question, who is Guild Wars for? And I think that over time, maybe at the start Guild Wars was for an audience. Maybe it was for somebody. Maybe it was for people who were not interested in other things. The anti-MMO, right? But over time, by hook or by crook, I believe that Guild Wars 2 is now a game for nobody. I don't think it has a niche, really. I think it has high production values and a good head of steam. And some things that it does that are really unique. But what I don't think it does, and this is something that I've seen not just in Guild Wars, but in many other games with live services models, is I don't think it has a good idea of who they're making their game for. Okay, so let's bring this back a little bit and frame it at a different level. I'm going to compare Guild Wars with a few other games that I've bounced off of recently or in past times, um, and kind of take this idea and kind of stamp it across these different frames of reference for hopefully perspective. At least that's the idea. And one of those games I'm going to talk about is Planetside 2. Planetside 2, for those who don't know, is basically the first MMO shooter. It's the sequel of Planetside, which came out in pretty much concurrently with World of Warcraft. I want to say in 2002, maybe 2003. It's a game where you start at level 1. As you progress in levels, you gain access to more equipment, more vehicles, more guns. You go out after signing up for a faction, and you defend your faction's territory and try to conquer the territory of the opposing factions. You can hop into a tank, you can hop in an airplane, you can grab a rocket launcher, you can grab an engineer's repair tool to repair vehicles, you can pilot a plane, you can do logistics, and you can ferry other players to the front lines. You can. It's a big game. And Planetside 2 was an iteration on that, that tried to share the soul of Planetside 1 with a much larger, more mainstream audience. I think it's really failed to do that, generally speaking, but it's done so well enough that I haven't turned it off. It's still around. And there's still a group of passionate people trying to push that game forward, which always makes me happy to see, because Planetside has a very dear place in my heart. It's a game that I poured a lot of time into and met some really cool people while playing. And it too is a live services game. It runs over time. People jump into and jump out of it. New things are released. It's not the same as a traditional fantasy MMO with stories and new gear and equipment. It's a little different than that, and it's one of the problems that they never, or either they didn't solve it or they're still trying to solve it, is how do you get people excited to re-engage with Planetside 2? And one of the ways that they tried to do this back a few years ago, and I don't know the exact date, was they had a few kind of big releases. One of these was something called Construction, and Construction was a bad fit for the game. It really alienated a lot of veteran players, and really was a signal to the community that this game was not for core shooter players. It was not a game for people who wanted to be good and get rewards for being good and show off for being good. And for shooters that are built on PvP combat, if you don't have that, you don't have much. So, how did the community deal with this? I think this actually came about before construction, but there was a while where there was this really cool thing going on in Planetside 2 called Farmers League. It was run by a few different players, and specifically players from a guild called Future Crew, which I was lucky enough to roll with at various times in my Planetside 1 and 2 experience. And Farmers League was a competitive league. They took this big open world sandbox PvP game and said, you know what? We like this game. We're good at this game. We want to take it to the next level. SOE at the time, who was the developer of Planetside 2, eventually Daybreak Gaming, don't want to encourage us to get good at this game. They just want us to log in and shoot random people in huge battles, which, that's the selling point of the game. But if you've played 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours, eventually that experience gets old. You want to take what you know and see how far you can push it, and that's what the Farmers League was about. They created a small format based on contesting a single base. They would use a test server, which, to the developers' credit, was provided by them, and they provided kind of token support for these players to use that environment for that purpose. And they would pile in and fight it out. There was scoring, there were rules, and most importantly, it was broadcast on Twitch with people who really knew how to talk about video games and how to make it look exciting. Using very little in the way of tools, they created what to me was a super engaging experience and lens through which to see Planetside. And I never got involved with it. Okay, I wasn't that good, and at the time that it was around, I wasn't playing a lot because I couldn't. But it really got me excited about playing Planetside 2. It really got me looking into some of the weapon specifics, finding out what was good for in what situations, trying to understand the decisions some of these players made and how they honed their skills to such a fine sheen. And having that out there really motivates a certain kind of player that I fall into. I guess you can call it a core gamer. Maybe that's not the right term for it, but having something out there that is cool and a little bit glorious and is a high ceiling to shoot for is really motivating for guys and gals like me. Eventually, this Farmers League died. I think that they ran for a few seasons and it was great, and eventually the people who were in charge of making it run just got tired. It's a big effort to sustain something like that all for free in your downtime. And the developers never looked at it and said, yeah, we want to make this a thing. They never brought it into the game proper, never really paid any credence to bringing that kind of an experience to Planetside 2 with outside of this community propped up thing. When it died, I lost my interest in the game and I moved on. That was years ago. So that's Planetside, and what that shows to me is that there's a certain kind of player, that core gamer, that when they're properly motivated will engage with your game. When they engage with your game, they'll pay money into it. That's me. I'm the kind of guy where, you know what? If I enjoy a hobby, I will put money into it. I will support the studio that develops the game. I'll support the other creators within that community. I'll buy swag. I like that. I think most people do. But when a game looks at me and says, we're just going to do the safe thing, we're going to stick with that thing that appeals to the lowest common denominator rather than try to pick something about some gamer demographic and hit it hard. That to me is just a massive turnoff, and that's what I've been experiencing with Guild Wars 2 lately. So, rewind the clock. 2015, this is when I started playing Guild Wars 2. And when I started playing, there are two really interesting things to share about that. One is it was about 7, 8, maybe 9 months before the release of Guild Wars 2's first expansion. It was announced literally within days of when I rolled my first character. Um, and that first expansion was a real turning point for the game in many ways. And when I started, I was playing with my wife, which was a new experience for me. She was not somebody who was traditionally into video games, and I never expected to share my interest in this hobby with her. But to the surprise of both of us, she jumped in with both feet, and God bless her, she tolerated playing that game on an old MacBook, and I helped figure it out, and we had many hours of fun experiences and immersing ourselves in this fantasy world. And I got to nerd out on kind of the stats and the RPG type stuff, the builds, how to play with groups, how to beat challenging content. And she got to be along for the ride. She got to see a lot of cool stories, and she got to experience a lot of really amazing art and be immersed in a cool world and meet a lot of people. It's a game that really opens the door for a lot of social interaction, even if it doesn't encourage it. Um, and what I mean by saying that is that it's in many ways, many of the systems in Guild Wars 2 are a big apology to MMO players. We're sorry that you've had to compete with other players over iron ore in other games. We're not going to make you do that. Everyone gets their own iron ore. We're sorry that you've played other games and defeated something hard and didn't get any loot for it. We're going to make sure you get loot for everything you do. We're sorry that you couldn't experience some content in the game because it was too hard or required too many hours of investment to play with a group of players who were good enough to tackle it. We're sorry. How did Guild Wars apologize? It made everything achievable by anybody. Literally anybody. Okay. So 2015. ArenaNet knew about this, I think. And there were some people there. I have a sense I know one of the main people responsible for this who wanted to get to drive towards a certain kind of player and wanted to see if that core audience could catch on with Guild Wars 2. Because in 2012, those players, they loved the vanilla game. They hit end game and they said, "What's the point? There's nothing here for me. Okay, time to play the next game." But in 2015, ArenaNet made a bold statement and said, "Gamers, this game deserves another look." And they spent months marketing and promoting this new expansion called Heart of Thorns. We're going into the jungle. Everything's going to be hard and intense. And to ArenaNet's credit, they actually delivered on that promise. They brought in the first raid in the game that it ever had, 10 players. And it was actually hard. People were really impressed and really excited about these raids. They weren't as long as a lot of players would like, but they were the right idea. Not only that, but Guild Wars 2 is such a high emphasis on the world, and so with an expansion, it's got to bring in new maps into the world, new areas to explore. But in the old game, exploration was no harder than walking down an aisle in a grocery store. You could go anywhere you wanted, walk around. Enemies weren't really a threat. They weren't there to stop you from going anywhere. Enemies were there for you to kill them for loot. They were essentially vending machines. But in Heart of Thorns, ArenaNet got a different idea, and they said, no, the enemies are here because they're a part of the world, and in order to believe that this is a dangerous place to be, the enemies have to actually be dangerous. And they did a lot of new things. They introduced new types of monsters, and they made them actually challenging. And not just like in a bullet spongy or tanky kind of way where they just have more health, but where they had new mechanics. They had monsters who would aggressively stealth you. They had monsters who would swarm you and kill you by 1,000 paper cuts. They introduced a break bar mechanic, which was a very good idea, which allowed you to use crowd control, which was typically more of a PvP feature of the game, more effectively on strong monsters in the game, so that after you use a knockdown effect enough times on a big boss, his break bar will deplete and he'll eventually go into a state of being stunned, or something about it will change. Maybe a flying enemy will fall to the ground and become vulnerable, something like that. So Guild Wars 2 got hard, and when that happened, I've been playing for a year, that or thereabouts, and I got pretty excited because I wanted something to sink my teeth into. That's what I loved. And I got involved with raids, and I worked on my build, and I helped my wife work on hers too, because um, she wanted to experience it too, and it was harder. So there was a time where I thought maybe she would want to raid. That didn't end up being something she wanted to do, but I helped her get involved with that too. That was a lot of fun, but there was a huge backlash in the community about how hard this game became. And a lot of people started feeling alienated. Not my Guild Wars 2. What game am I playing? This isn't the game that was made for me. The MMO refugee who wants nothing to be hard and everything to be rewarded. So what happened? Did ArenaNet double down on their philosophy of engaging with a core gamer audience, to inspire dedicated players to dedicate themselves further, to give lots of high-end content to creators to attract new people? Did they do that? Well, ArenaNet chose not to choose. They took their open world and they neutered it. These new zones, these new monsters, everything got their balls chopped off, and it once again went back to being an experience where you just go where you want. Maybe it's a little harder than the base game, but still, it certainly was a marked difference. Raids, well, raids continue to be in the game. These raid wings typically uh, comprise 3 to 4 encounters, usually 2 to 3 bosses, and they're fun. Honestly, they're good. Uh, of the 7 wings that have been released, I've played 6. I haven't yet played the most recent one, and I've beaten them all. Um, and my takeaway from that experience was more or less in line with how well rewarded it was. And ArenaNet did something really right in Heart of Thorns. They threw their cap over the wall and they said, if you're a raider, you're going to be rewarded with something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game. And it's going to help distinguish you from everybody else. This person's a raider. They have their shit together. They're somebody to be impressed by. And that is legendary armor. Legendary gear in Guild Wars serves 2 purposes. One's cosmetic. They are some of the coolest and best looking weapons and armor in the game, and the flashiest, certainly. But secondarily, and most importantly, they allow you to swap your stats around. Obviously, legendary gear is the highest power level in the game. And this is something we haven't talked about. One of the ways that Guild Wars 2 also apologizes to gamers who are like, oh man, whenever I log in, I have to grind more gear and I always have to get better loot. And what is the gear that I had a year ago isn't worthwhile anymore. So to apologize to those players, ArenaNet said, okay, We're going to have a highest gear level. Once you get there, you're never going to have to progress past it, ever. And it's been that way for the last 5.5 years perhaps, since Ascended Gear was introduced. Legendary Gear and Ascended Gear are the same power level, but Legendary Gear can have its stats change at any time. That means you can go from a build that's kind of being like a tanky healer to a build that's about being an aggressive damage dealer without putting on different armor, which is really cool and very convenient. Um, so Legendary Armor introduced that flexibility to the armor in the game, which never existed before. And I was really excited about it. And it got me into raids, and it got me into raiding guilds, and it got me watching raiding streams. And when I was doing all those things, I was also doing daily quests out in the open world, and I was also learning about fractals and going down that kind of alternate kind of experience, which is a five man dungeon that scales up in difficulty. Um, I was engaging with lots of other parts of the game because the legendary armor was a cool carrot and an awesome reward. And I really teased it out as long as I could. I started on day one, which would have been, I think, October 2015, and I finally collected my legendary armor. I believe last year during the summer, that being 2018. So I made it last almost 3 years. And if you're a dedicated player, you could probably knock out going from 0 to 100% on the legendary armor in 2, maybe 3 months, I'm guessing. So that gives you an idea of how much I stretched that out to give myself a reason to stay interested. And then I got it, and then I maybe raided once or twice after I got it, and then I dropped the game for months. I didn't know why. Eventually I realized, oh, there's nothing in this game for me to give a shit about. Honestly, besides legendary armor, and there are a couple of other legendary pieces there too, there's nothing in raids that rewards you better than anything else in the game. There's nothing in raids that makes you more powerful or cooler than someone who logs in and does open world map events. How frustrating that is to somebody who wants to get deep into a game, for the game to tell you, okay, you can get deep if you want, but that doesn't we're not going to give you anything for it. We're not going to incentivize you to do it. You got to do it because it's in you. We're not going to progress your character. We're not going to allow you to actually distinguish yourself in any way for the choices you make. Everyone gets everything because that makes everyone happy. That means everyone plays our game. Yay, right? Well, if the game is for everyone, then really it's for no one. I'm going to finish this thought by talking about one more game, and that game's Destiny 2. I recently decided to give it a spin after having an enjoyable but ultimately frustrating experience with Warframe. Um, and I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it. It was pretty obvious when I picked it up earlier in 2019, so this would have been after the release of Forsaken expansion. Uh, I was really impressed by how good it felt. And after getting past the content that was from the first year of the game, I really caught fire with it. There was a lot here. Not only that, but there are a lot of people doing really cool stuff with this game. There's a huge YouTube creator community. There are raids. Um, there's a raid race whenever they release one, which is so cool. They give you jackets for it. I mean, what a cool incentive to engage with a game. And even if you're not in the raid race, you can still watch it and give a shit. It Even content that is really only consumed by 1% of 1% of 1% of the player base can still benefit everybody because YouTube is a thing and Twitch is a thing, and your game isn't only as good as the experience someone has while loading it up and playing for themselves. It's as good as the experience it creates across the entire community. And I thought it was cool as shit that someone got world first on the raid that recently released with Season of Opulence. I was not in a place to play it myself, but there was a photo finish. The two clans that finished it first finished within like 10 minutes of each other. Holy shit. It was so close that whatever back end switch Bungie throws to to give the in-game reward to the world first and turn it off for number 2 and 3 and after. They didn't have time to do that because it was so close. The world first players got a unique exotic reward. Well, sorry, it's not unique. It's unique to the raid. Anyone can get it eventually, but the world first got it as a guaranteed drop. Okay, that's a cool incentive. And if you beat it within the first 24 hours, you get a cool jacket. I mean, it's not a game, so you can't really show it off to people in the game, but Destiny is the kind of game that has a big enough community that meeting in person might be important to you. Guardian Con is a thing, and it's just it's really cool. And not only are there really cool deep systems that inspire you to get better and understand more deeply in the game, but there is stuff out there for the top percentage of players that pulls everybody forward and gives eyeballs in the wider creator community. Now, I've only played this game for about 100, maybe 150 hours, so it could be that I'm wrong, and I'll get to the end of it. But and for me, whenever I start a new game, there's this period of good faith where I'm saying, I believe this game has legs, and I'm going to invest myself with faith that it'll give back to me in the long term, not just the short term. Planetside 2 failed to do that. Guild Wars 2 is failing to do that. Warframe, which I haven't really talked about, really failed to do that too. Destiny is feeling like it might. And of course, there's WoW Classic on the horizon, which is the juggernaut of deep engagement on the horizon. So, Guild Wars 2. Is it a game for your wife? Is it a game for your coworker? Is it a game for your teenage brother who plays 12 hours a day? Is it a game for all of them, or is it a game for none? I played The Last Living World story, and as soon as I clocked in the final cutscene, I closed it out. It was a cool story. It was a neat moment. I made another video about it if you're interested. But all the other stuff there is to do in the game, why? Everyone can get it. Everyone can do it. It's not hard. It's not interesting. Why should I engage deeper, ArenaNet? Maybe they'll start answering that question again at some point. With the recent layoffs, I kind of get the sense that we're just going to be seeing more of the same from ArenaNet. But who knows? I could be wrong. Okay. Let this be the end of my ramble. Thanks for listening. Signing off.